I'd like to thank you for inviting me on the show. It's such an honor to be here, and I'd just like to say that when I'm not playing Xbox with my mate Thor, I really like to listen to my favorite podcast, Pop Culture Pasta. Hey, Doug! Doug! Oh, that's right. Doug's dead.
Pop Culture Pastor.
Okay, so Dave, I have a question for you.
All right.
If I could give you like the first 7 minutes of a movie you might be iffy on watching, and all it requires for you to do is just smile, are you down for it?
Maybe smile once and then I get to watch it?
No, the whole time.
I have to smile.
Yeah,
the whole time I'm watching.
Have to have a camera on you so that the censor can see that you're smiling.
How long is it?
7 minutes.
I don't think the average American smiles 7 minutes in a day.
Oh, there's no way.
This
you might
genius.
get 2.5 minutes of smilage.
This is actually genius. This is for the horror movie.
Yeah, it's for Smile too. That's how you get to preview the first 7 minutes of the movie. Decide if you want to buy a ticket at your local cinema, and then be like, oh, all I have to do is smile. It doesn't cost.
I don't know. I'm probably out. I didn't see Smile 1, so I won't understand any of it.
I don't know if Smile 1 will help.
It's not that kind of a movie? Doesn't have deep lore?
Not really. Like, Smile 1 had some cool creep factors to it and some jump scares, but yeah.
Man, we're definitely living in the age of the scary movie. They're back.
They are. And based off like how much they have cost versus how much they have made, they might be the box office winners for the whole year.
And everything's topsy-turvy. Venom 3 is making money.
Yep.
I just don't know what's going on. I'm sure this election will sort everything out. I'm sure it will not. I'm sure it will bring closure.
Fingers crossed.
We are recording this on election night, as it were.
Guy Fawkes Day.
That's right. We are recording this on Guy Fawkes Day, and that is
For those of us who celebrate.
yeah, that is this. There's a specific reason we're doing that, because this is a Be Kind Rewind on V for Vendetta. But as you know, we have things to get to first. I should say this is Pop Culture Pastor, the podcast. My name is Dave. Cody's here.
I am.
We also have guest Brian John. Brian, what should we introduce you as? I mean, you're a geek of the round table, but what is your profession?
I'm a web developer by trade, so I build websites and I just stay in my basement all day. But you can just call me Brian or Hey Kid, whatever.
Why haven't you built our website?
You haven't asked.
Oh.
You have not because you ask not.
Exactly. Leave it to the pastors to
Yes.
miss the obvious thing. You need to ask.
Yeah. All right. Let me write that down. Ask Brian about website, and if he wants to go to Taco Bell later. Okay. All right. So we always start off with the news. This is not like us. We don't generally talk about celebrity deaths.
No.
But
like it's once in a blue moon.
Yeah. Mostly when we talk about it, it's, oh, that guy's dead?
I thought they died like 20 years ago.
Yeah, it's an ongoing theme of this podcast that I'm confused about who's alive and who's gone, who's passed on. But this week, there was a death, and it kind of shook me a little bit. I'm not broken up about it.
Was it the squirrel?
And it was not Peanut the squirrel, although...
Or the raccoon.
I will only say one thing. What are we doing? What are we doing? Come on. Don't we have bigger things to do than take people's animals they probably shouldn't own? But can't we all? Never mind. Let's not go there. It's already been governmented and politicized enough. But at the end of the day, I'm just like, it's a squirrel.
And the raccoon.
Someone took a raccoon too?
Well, it was in the same house.
Oh, yeah. Because he had multiple animals. He was like Ace Ventura.
Yes.
No, Quincy Jones died this week.
Yes. That was a death that I didn't realize he was that old, but I assumed that he had to be old. But
Yeah.
Rashida Jones is younger-ish.
Yeah, 91 years old. Arguably, says The Guardian, the most versatile pop cultural figure of the 20th century. So that right there,
It's
there's
bold.
plenty of reason
Yeah.
why this is noteworthy to talk about him. He produced, I mean, just so much of Michael Jackson's work. Off the Wall, Thriller, The Bad Album, as well as music for Sinatra, Aretha Franklin, Donna Summer. Won 28 Grammy Awards. Named as one of the most influential jazz musicians of the 20th century by Time magazine. But there's some things that I think a lot of people don't know is that he produced like shows, movies. It wasn't just this. It wouldn't be enough to just say, oh, by the way, he put together Sinatra's Fly Me to the Moon.
Oh.
Which Buzz Aldrin played during the first moon landing, allegedly. I know there's some weirdos out there. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to call you a weirdo.
Tell that to Stanley Kubrick.
He introduced the world to Oprah.
Oh.
She was a nobody when he cast her in The Color Purple. Whoopi Goldberg as well in The Color Purple. They were both kind of unknowns. He produced the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. He's responsible for Will Smith, basically. I mean, Will Smith was... I knew him as the Fresh Prince, but I think he was still somewhat unknown. Then he gets that show. Later on, he does Summertime, and then he's blowing up. But yeah, Quincy Jones was amazing. He was so ingrained in pop culture in my household growing up that I didn't even know him. I didn't even know who he was, but my mom loves award shows. She would watch the Oscars, the Emmys, the Grammys. And it, like, everybody that always got up to win after they won a Grammy they'd thank God, and then they'd thank Quincy Jones. And it became like an inside joke in my family where if someone gave me a compliment, I'm like, well, thank you. First, I'd just like to thank God and, of course, Quincy Jones. And people just look at me weird, like they don't get it, but we got it.
Yeah.
And it comes from this like effect on pop culture that Quincy Jones had, because if you watch the Grammys in the 80s, people were thanking Quincy Jones.
They should.
I think I definitely fall in that camp of, I probably have seen so much of the ripple effect that he's created, but I wouldn't ever know that he was directly involved unless I heard it, right? Like the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, how much of that have I watched and didn't even know that he was part of it,
Yeah. What a life, man. What a life. I just want to just take a moment and say thank you, Quincy, for being, I don't even know what the word would be, but thank you for using the God-given talents to create. I don't think we thank creators enough. Like, even if I sit here and just say, oh, this movie was awful, I should probably get in the habit of being like, but thank you.
Thanks for trying.
Thank you for giving me 2 hours to divert me from the awfulness of the world,
right,
so I can complain about Venom 3.
Thanks for giving me excuse to pay so much money to eat movie theater popcorn, even if the movie wasn't great.
I practically feel like I paid half of Tom Hardy's contract.
Venom 3 wasn't that bad.
No, I was just using it as an example. I'm not trying to bomb on Venom 3. They don't care. Venom 3 is making money.
As it should.
Sony's like that meme where they're down like in 9th place and they got the champagne and like being obnoxious. That's exactly Sony right now, because they're like, guess what? Craven's next.
Making money.
Yeah. This is election night, so we never talk about politics, but this was so weird and amazing, and it involves pop culture. Did you watch any of J.D. Vance's appearance on the Joe Rogan podcast?
A couple clips.
He's talking to Joe Rogan about, first of all, they were talking about whether they were discussing how the liberal party said math is racist or something or other. I don't know. But they're talking about all this and how Vance starts talking about Boys in the Hood. Because in that movie, the character that Lawrence Fishburne plays makes a comment about how the SATs are racist or culturally biased. And so they start talking about Boys in the Hood just out of nowhere. So have you guys seen Boys in the Hood? I know you guys are younger than me.
Yes. It's been probably a decade. Yes.
Not.
So the weird thing about Boys in the Hood is it comes out like right in kind of around the time when gangsta rap is huge. So a lot of young white kids, boys,
yes,
watch this movie like me, and we just watched it over and over again. And it was like this window into this life that we didn't obviously grow up with, but it was almost as if, like, of course it's dramatized, you know.
Yes.
It's a dramatized look at what life is like in inner cities, and their lives. But it almost gave a lot of young white kids like me this look of like, oh, this idea of like, oh, we can kind of understand it. We kind of understand the gangster rap we're listening to, and maybe it's not worth idolizing, but we still like the music. And now we get a little bit of look at the culture, and it just became like, I can't explain it. We just really liked watching that movie so much. So we watched like the Hispanic version, Blood In, Blood Out. Did you guys ever see that?
No.
You're making stuff up.
No, I'm not making stuff up. It's like there's like literally the Hispanic version. There's probably Hispanic people listening to this. They're like, right on, Dave. Say it, Dave. And it's like, I will say it. Don't take me to the hospital. People die there. That's a famous line from the movie.
People do die there.
Yeah. Anyways, they're both great movies, but I can't really explain why we gravitated towards that movie. But it's just to say, I am deeply familiar with Boys in the Hood. Well, enter J.D. Vance, who starts talking about this movie, and he says something. This is amazing. On the Joe Rogan show, he says, this movie was extremely influential to my entire political worldview. This is J.D. Vance, the guy that wrote the book. That's the show on Netflix now.
Yeah. So I was on X and saw, like, if I gave you 10,000 guesses, you wouldn't guess what movie he says influences his political backing.
Yeah.
And I watched the clip and I'm like, oh, I would have guessed Princess Diaries or Princess Bride before this movie. And I would have guessed like every Hallmark movie that I could have thought of. I mean, 1,000 movies that I have seen, and no, Boys in the Hood would never come to fruition.
Yeah. I don't listen. I did not listen to this podcast because maybe only death seems worse than listening to anyone involved in politics talk for 3 hours, because those Joe Rogan podcasts are long. And I don't mind. I kind of like Joe Rogan's podcast usually because usually it's interesting people and they open up. They say things. But not politicians. They never say anything.
No.
They're so manicured. So when I saw the headline for this, I was like, wait, he was deeply influenced by Boys in the Hood? Like, what do you mean? Like, if one of your friends shot at someone from the car, you knew that you were going to get retribution, then like influenced that way? Or like it helped you with your circle? I don't understand what he's talking about. Well, it turns out he's talking about gentrification.
Oh.
Yeah, it's all about Lawrence Fishburne's character, Furious Styles.
Larry Fishburne.
And his stance on not letting banks buy up the community and get gentrified, which is, you know, if you're from bigger cities, you know exactly what I'm talking about. We live in a small, like, gentrification doesn't make any sense here because our stuff just gets so old it falls over.
Please buy our stuff.
Please, financial institutions, come buy our buildings and fix them up so we can get chains.
Yes.
But yeah, it's still such a weird thing to bring up and say. Mm-hmm. Like, even saying what I said, saying that, like, yeah, Boys in the Hood was kind of a big movie to 13-year-old Dave. It seems kind of weird, but in a way that, like, it exposed me to a heavily dramatized version of other people's lives, which I suppose at the end of the day is not a bad thing. It's good to know how people in the world are living other than yourself, get you out of that, you know, echo chamber. But I think it was just worse with this guy because you're just like, what?
It feels like he came to a good point and he's trying to, like, almost pander to an audience where he's trying to be like, right. I have this one fictional character who has a ideology that's similar to something that I believe in, but this is also going to make me seem really cool. Like I watch cool movies like Boys in the Hood. So I'm just going to name drop it real quick.
Yeah. It's like he's doing the Dr. Evil. He's like, I'm with it. I'm hip.
Exactly.
He's like, okay. All right, JD, settle down. But yeah, I just wanted to bring that up and talk about it because it was so weird. It was just weird. But that is kind of why I like the Rogan show, is because people do tend to, you know, get kind of real and say things. I don't know how to feel about this news. Brian, are you a Game of Thrones fan?
I did watch all the original seasons, and like everybody else, I was disappointed in the ending. But yeah, I am a fan. I haven't watched any of the House of Dragons, the new stuff.
It's actually pretty good, House of Dragon. And
Excuse me.
It probably benefits from the idea that it's not a story that's actually written. It's like he wrote something similar to like the Silmarillion from Tolkien, where it's not full stories. It's just kind of a recapping of the history of Westeros.
Got it.
And so they're extrapolating it out into a longer story. So the good thing, and it's already there. So like it's already, the beginning and the end. And so they don't have to pretend, like try and figure out what the end's going to be like they did with Game of Thrones, the original show, which is why the end of it was just so amazingly awful.
Right.
But it seems like apparently Warner Brothers Discovery is in early development on a potential Game of Thrones movie. Do we need this? Do we need the ongoing stories?
Six seasons in a movie.
Do we need
a fellow Community fan? Let's go.
Do we need an interconnected Westeros universe, a Game of Thrones universe? Because I'm not so sure. I was kind of dubious about House of the Dragon, if I'm being honest. But I gave it a try and I thought, okay, this is pretty good. Although I still, if I'm being honest, I'm probably annoy people because I'm a book reader of Game of Thrones.
Okay.
That's what I really thought was good, the books.
Yeah.
Which, of course, he never finished. And now they're going to come out with a movie, and I'm like, he's literally never going to finish those books, is he?
Nope. He's just going to make bank off of his intellectual property.
At this point, he has plausible deniability. If he never finishes the books, he can always say, well, my ending was going to be better than what they came up with. But if he actually puts something out, George R.R. Martin can actually be held to a standard, and we can say, well, your ending wasn't much better, or, whatever.
Yeah. I kind of wonder.
It'd be hard to be worse, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, I kind of wonder if he just doesn't really have an idea of how he's going to end that story.
Probably not.
And so he let them finish it with the few notes he had. And when everybody went against it, he was like, yeah, you guys are terrible. Because he sort of did the same thing with House of the Dragon. He said some things on like his website and his blog or whatever that got a lot of run during the second season of that, which ended a few months back. But he kind of made some headlines by kind of dogging them too.
You knock it off. Matt Smith is a treasure and we're not butchering his properties.
Well, Matt, I mean, he's not the one writing it.
He's the one starring in it. So
just back off, man. It's okay. No one's attacking Matt Smith.
You better not.
Oh, all right. I'm just saying, no one's doing that. Anyways, yeah, I'm just kind of like, I'm not so sure we need this.
Yeah, to answer your original question, I don't know that we need it. I would love to hear, like, at what point in this story are we splintering off, right? Because you could take it any direction. You could tell the story of the Greyjoys. You could tell the story of, you could go further previous, right? You could go further future. There are a lot of ways that you could go. I don't think it's necessary, but when you've got a cash cow that people were invested in, it was the hotness for a long time, and a lot of people were invested. I remember, like, going out with my wife shopping, and people were like, I can't wait to get off of work because I got to go home and we got a watch party tonight. Like, employees telling me that, like...
You remember watch parties?
Yeah.
Those were awesome.
Yeah.
For me, I think that some people view this series, I guess, or intellectual properties kind of along the same lines as Tolkien with Lord of the Rings. And you just bleed that cash cow dry.
Exactly.
It's the new era of IP, Cody. That's what we do.
And I mean, we did that with things that weren't written out before, like Star Trek. Like, we're going to have 1,000 spin-off series, and here's like 10 different movies that you don't need to watch like half of. So
somewhere listener Kyle is very upset with you right now. How dare you?
I'm just saying what the interwebs says.
Kyle, I'm fighting for you. I just want you to know that, buddy. I'm fighting for you. How dare you denigrate Star Trek like that? Okay. Yeah. We'll see. I don't know. I could be talked into a future Jon Snow story. Set it 20 years or so after the end of where you ended it. North of the Wall, brand new story with Jon Snow.
Well, since
I might be in.
Jon Snow's never going to get a Marvel movie.
Yeah, well, let's not talk about that because that makes me all sorts of disappointed. You take the time to set up one of the coolest characters in the Marvel Universe, in my opinion, and now we're not going to get him? No.
Yeah.
I need a Black Knight. I don't need a Black Knight movie, but I need him to like be in some movie.
Like preferably with Blade.
Preferably with Blade and the Midnight Suns. Yeah, exactly. All right. Who wants to play the movie game?
The last time I lost.
You're going to win against me. I'm going to be terrible at this. So
it's the movie game coming up next. Stick around. All right, gentlemen, it is time for the movie game.
Okay, my phone is up. I'm not looking.
Cody, put the phone down. No cheating. Brian, are you familiar with how the movie game works?
I am, in fact.
Okay, so just for the listeners, here's what's going to go down. I am holding in my hand 3 Rotten Tomato profiles for 3 movies. One is generally a bad movie, one is usually a mid-range movie, and one is a good movie. A fresh movie, as they say on Rotten Tomatoes. And what's going to happen is both guys are going to get a chance to pick one of these movies to try and solve. And there's steps that they'll get a new clue for each step. The first step, you get the year and the Rotten Tomatoes score. The second step, you get the second billed actor. Third step, audience score. Fourth step, first billed actor. And if it makes it all the way to the 5th, you get my blurb voice and the blurb for the movie.
And then you get womp womp.
What's womp womp?
You lose.
Oh, if you don't get it after all that. I mean, to be honest, most of these, as I'm looking at them in my hand, I don't know how you could make it through and not get these movies. That should give you some hope.
That's good
also
news for
a
me.
lot of embarrassment when you don't.
Right, exactly.
So we'll start with you, Brian, since you are the guest. In my hand, I'm holding 3 movie profiles. One for a 25% rotten movie, one for a 72% upper mid movie, and one for a 99% fresh movie, according to Rotten Tomatoes. Which one would you like to try and solve?
I guess to give myself a chance, I'm going to go for the 99, even though it feels a bit cop-outy, but give it a shot.
It's weird. I've seen enough variation that this could be hard. Like a 99% could be hard if you're not like up to date on your Oscar-winning movies.
Fair.
Yeah. Okay. Level 1. You already know the Rotten Tomato score, 99%. This is a movie that came out in 1982.
Dang it. Okay, so that's...
So it's not Avatar.
That is 6 years before I was born.
Yep.
So
Yep.
we've got to go into the memory banks here.
It's going to make it tough. 99%. That is near critical unanimous love.
Okay. Now I got to get a pen.
Here he goes. He's going to write something. The pins are up there, man. This is a thing Cody does where he tries to write what he thinks is the answer on a piece
I respect
of paper.
it.
Yeah.
I'm going to take just a guess in the dark, and I know it's wrong. We'll just say a fistful of dollars.
That's a good guess.
It's a great guess, but it's not that. It's also not Cody's guess. He's wrong too. The second billed actor, level 2, D. Wallace.
Oh, that doesn't help.
D. Wallace. See, I know you guys aren't 80s guys because
I've never heard that name in my life. I would like to guess a fistful of dollars again.
If it helps any of the listeners at home and Brian, when she starred in this movie, her full name was D. Wallace Stone. I don't know if like she had a marriage.
Oh, if you're talking about D. Wallace Stone.
Now that unlocked it.
So you don't have a guess.
I will pass.
Okay, this is where it gets interesting. The audience score, 72%.
Okay.
Quite a drop.
Oh,
It's usually the opposite.
yes. So this is sounding like super artsy.
I'm going to have to go to the next one.
All right.
Give me
Number
the top
4,
build.
the top billed actor is Henry Thomas. Henry Thomas.
I don't know that name either.
So you had D. Wallace, Henry Thomas. It's interesting. Yeah, this is interesting.
These are names that I bet if I saw the face, I'd be like, oh, I know this.
I will say, Cody, we have watched something that we've talked about on this podcast with Henry Thomas.
Snap.
You just don't know who it is.
I don't know the name. I know the face.
Since I'm about to read him the blurb anyways, I will just tell you he's in Midnight Mass.
Oh.
I've seen Midnight Mass.
Okay, here we go.
I know.
Don't write it down. I know you're going to know now.
Yeah, I know.
Here's the blurb. This is my favorite part. A little boy befriends a gentle alien stranded on Earth and tries to help him escape the government and go home.
It's E.T. the extraterrestrial.
It is E.T. the extraterrestrial.
Oh, yeah. Now, like, I knew his name was Henry.
It's weird because, yeah, like, for that day and age, they're not big names even for that time.
Yeah.
I was going to say, like, I would have listed Drew Barrymore, but she wasn't.
That's the movie that makes her big.
She was
Yes,
nobody. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, yeah, interesting stuff. And interesting, Dee Wallace Stone is a character actor. Like, she's in lots of 80s movies and sitcoms and stuff. But yeah, if you're not an 80s kid, then yeah, I don't.
If you
I
don't
blame you.
throw in the stone, I don't know.
All right, Cody, you got a 25% and a 72%. Which would you like to try and solve?
Let's go 72.
We can go 72%.
I'm not feeling bold.
We will hold on to the 25% in case we need a tiebreaker.
That does happen sometimes.
72% a Rotten Tomatoes score for a movie that came out in 2004.
Pirates of the Caribbean.
The streak continues of a Pirates of the Caribbean guess. That is incorrect. Level 2, the second build actor, John Grease. John Grease. Gries, since I'm not sure I'm saying that right.
I know who that is. I know that actor.
You know who it is?
Yeah.
Oh, Brian knows this movie.
It's Uncle Rico from Napoleon Dynamite is John Grease.
Why would you give him that clue?
Oh.
Why would you give him that clue?
I just want to prove that I know something.
You should have held on
Is
to
it
it.
Napoleon
It
Dynamite?
is Napoleon Dynamite.
Let's go.
You just gave him the ammunition.
I'm just happy to play.
I would have got it once we got to, is it, what's Napoleon's name?
John
Your
Heater.
next
John
clue
Heater.
would have been 74% audience score, and John Heder is the top billed actor.
And I would have, like, to throw me off, I would have said, oh, that is the guy from Real Genius. That's not Val Kilmer or the little kid.
All right, then. All right.
Is his name Laszlo or Laz? Like, he's the guy that lives
in Real Genius, yeah.
he
Laszlo.
lives in
John Grease,
the closet.
or affectionately known as Uncle Rico.
Yes.
Or the Wolfman with Nards on the Monster Squad.
There you go.
Yeah. He's everywhere. That dude, we're going to have a Legends episode on that dude one day.
Fingers crossed, so then I can talk about Real Genius.
No one knows. No one listening to this pod knows what you're talking about.
If they're from the 80s, they know.
I don't think there's that many people my age listening to this pod.
My age?
Yeah, but they're not from the 80s. Get out of here. You're not from the 80s.
I am.
All right. We're going to go on to our main subject now. Stick around, because when we come back, it's time for a Be Kind Rewind on V for Vendetta. When we come back. All right, fellas, we're back. It is literally November 5th. Remember, the 5th of November. The gunpowder treason and plot. That's literally that day as we're
Yes.
recording. I wish we could have timed it so it
Was it
fell
released?
on that day, but it's close enough. And as a special like bonus, we're all feeling like political right now because the election is going on. It's also election day as we're speaking. And so this is all, I don't know. I think Cody and I both watched this movie today.
Yes.
And so it seemed extra prescient. I don't know if you felt that way too.
Yeah.
As you were watching, it was like, oh man. So like, obviously it's a bit fantastical in places, even as far as what the government looks like and the evilness of it all. But there's little things in there when they're talking about how it led to that, where you're like, oh, that's not unnerving at all.
Right.
Is Alan Moore a prophet? I had that thought for a split second. I'm
Yeah.
not going to lie.
I have this written down. I have this in my notes to lead off. This whole movie can be summed up in one question. What if the Wachowskis wrote a Batman movie? That's what I have written down. And I think that sums up the entire movie, honestly, because It was interesting to me, especially, and we're going to get into it later. We're going to have Scotty on the Geek Phone later to talk about the original Alan Moore comic. But having read that a long time ago, it was interesting to watch this movie again, because I think when I haven't seen this since, it really came out on DVD after it had come out in theater. I watched it twice. And I really was like, oh, they really took some cues from Batman that I did not notice when I first watched this. Like the whole first action sequence and the music even, I was like, oh.
Oh, yeah. So when this first came out, I watched it in theaters. And then I owned it on DVD, watched it a lot in college.
Yeah, you radical.
Exactly. But it comes out in a time I'm in high school. So this is the time that people are like, hey, politics, I'm someone interested, but in a rebellious way.
Yeah, it's hitting you in all your good rebellious buttons and revolution buttons. Yeah.
Yes. Almost got a Guy Fawkes tattoo because of this.
It is interesting while watching this movie as well that several internet presences of what would we call them, anti-establishment groups, took their cues from probably this movie and Alan Moore. I mean, I don't know who started Anonymous. That's kind of the point of being called Anonymous, but they used this mask.
They did
for their symbol. So it's interesting how much this movie and the graphic novel in particular affected the culture.
Which also, it's kind of interesting that this is now owned by DC, this comic book. Mm-hmm. And
Vertigo. It was originally Vertigo, but now it's a subsidiary of DC.
And so...
Same as Sandman, right? Mm-hmm. Vertigo Comics?
Yes. Yeah. And I will say, Vertigo has an impressive catalog of, I guess, your more adult thinking comics.
Yeah, you want good stories? Yeah, it's good to have Neil Gaiman and Alan Moore in your stable, huh?
Yes. Where not everything is up to that level elsewhere.
Right.
And outside of Frank Miller, it's kind of hard to be oh, I really like this person's run or this person's run. It was really deep and thick, thoughtful. But no, Alan Moore, phenomenal. And after watching this movie, I had to go back and read his quotes about the comic book industry. And there's caveats that I would put on what he said. And I'm like, if this is part of it, then yes, I can kind of see what you're saying, but otherwise he's a little out there for me.
Yeah. Brian, what's your level of connection to V for Vendetta?
So I'm kind of in the same boat as Cody. I was in high school when it came out. I remember watching it, and as you're watching it, I had no idea that it was an adaptation from a graphic novel at all. I knew nothing about Alan Moore or anything, but watching it, seeing its moody film style, how they really paid attention to kind of the dark themes, it was obvious that it was a Wachowski film just because it felt like The Matrix in some moments, obviously when you get into the action sequences. But I was never I was never of the anarchist side of things, but I was definitely,
No.
When this movie came up as the topic for this episode, the first thing I thought was, oh, it's a pretty political movie. And then I realized what time we would be filming it. And I was like, oh, no, it's a pretty political time, too.
Yeah.
Political time and the anniversary of the events of the movie and the person that kind of spawns the movement that leads V to this moment.
Yeah. And I felt the same way. I was like, oh, this is a good idea. Let's revisit this movie. If we're going to get political and talk about government structures and things like that, we might as well do it with a good movie that sets it. I think my connection to this movie is I've always loved history. And I think over time, humans like stories where we fight the man, quote unquote, the man. Mm-hmm. But if you study history, you know that the man never is the one with the power. So like even in the Roman Empire, the Roman Republic, every one of those, like whether they were dictators or whether they were benevolent, whatever, Julius Caesar, they always knew where the true power lied, with the mob, with the common folk, because they outnumber you by a lot. And that is the essential, like, of the movie. I don't know that I would say that about Alan Moore's material, but for this movie, that's essentially the idea. So it's based on DC Vertigo comic series of the same name by Alan Moore, David Lloyd, and Tony Weir. V for Vendetta is set in a near future Britain, which is controlled by a totalitarian regime led by High Chancellor Adam Sutler, played great by John Hurt.
Former doctor on Doctor Who.
Yeah, he was great in this movie. Their group is called the Norse Fire Party. They lay on like the Nazi imagery pretty thick, which I tend to think if that was going to happen again in our context today or in the near future, it would not look like Nazi imagery.
Yeah, it definitely felt like, because they are distilling down a lot of material into, I mean, it's already a long movie, right? We discussed this.
Yeah.
It's a big long movie, but they're still trying to get a lot of background into the movie as quickly as possible. And what's the shortcut to everybody's brain to say these are the bad guys is to literally say they're literally Nazis. Look at the imagery. They literally changed Statler's name to sound more like Hitler for the movie, because in the comic books, in the graphic novels, his name was different, but they changed it to sound like Statler to end with Hitler, the same like suffix.
Yeah. And we're going to get into that later with Scotty. I'm sure Scotty will bring that stuff up too. But yeah, it's like a trick, isn't it?
Yeah.
In the movie type things. And that's where it kind of differs again from Alan Moore's work too, is that the clear presence of a bad guy. But that goes along with V himself is different in the movie, where he's clearly definitively more of a hero, anti-hero type.
I would say anti-hero.
Which very much like Batman.
Yeah.
He plays that same role. Like, I'm here to set the city straight. So, the Norse Fire Party, also nice. Yeah, in case you didn't understand how we're trying to tie it to the Nazis, Hitler historically had a fascination with Norse mythology. So, Norse Fire, Nazi, I mean, it just sounds really close. Plus, it gives a little nod again to that. Their party deploys propaganda and threats of imprisonment and executions to keep the population in check. Evie Hammond, played by Natalie Portman, a seemingly ordinary citizen who works for the state-run TV network, but her world is turned upside down when she has an encounter with V, played by Hugo Weaving, a freedom-fighting vigilante attempting to unseat the ruling class. After aiding V to escape from the authorities, Evie also becomes the public enemy and must put her faith in V to survive. While the two slowly bond, plotting the next move, the police inspector, played by Stephen Ray, is dispatched to hunt down the vigilante. But as he unravels the mysterious past of the mask-wearing figure, he's confronted with the truth of the corrupt system he has been enforcing. That's pretty much it, right? That's the plot. But it's pretty deep. The movie is obviously complex. We mentioned it's a pretty long movie.
Over 2 hours.
Yeah. But I think it's a good movie. And I guess we should just get into what's good or what holds up in this movie. Brian, what holds up for you?
Like I mentioned a little bit, I loved the Matrix-esque fight scenes. There's not many of them. There's not many action sequences for an action movie, but obviously the last 20 minutes of this movie kind of crescendo pretty hard, and that was pretty good for me.
Yeah, you can definitely see the Wachowskis' influence on all of this.
Yeah. And I looked into some of like how they accomplished the visual effects. They had the bad guys move in slow motion in real time. They were moving in slow motion while V moved in real time, and they filmed it at 60 frames a second so they could then speed it up and make it look like he was moving even faster. So that's how they accomplished that look, really. So that was really good for me. I really liked the moody lighting and cinematography, how they chose to like make, London seem really disheveled and dark and moody, and then just really light the foreground and the characters and let them pop off the screen.
As far as dystopian movies go, Yeah, there's something about the look of this movie that is like, man, they really nailed this.
It's like they were going, because the graphic novel was so heavily shaded, whereas, literal black on people's faces, it's almost like they were recreating that in cinema.
Yeah, and I gotta say that even though they depart from the feeling and the point of the graphic novel, I do think they still create something that stands on its own and is just maybe, I don't know, I think maybe just as affecting and has something just as deep to say, even though it's saying something different than what Alan Moore was saying in the original work. So I kind of dug that.
Yeah.
What else? What else do you think holds up?
I looked into the Norse Fire Party a little bit because I liked that in the beginning when Evie is sneaking out to go meet with Gordon, she gets captured by guys who call themselves fingermen, right?
Yeah.
And throughout the movie, you start hearing about like the hand is referenced as the entire police department for the V for Vendetta universe, and the finger is actually the Peter Creedy, who's the head of the he's considered the finger,
who is comically evil,
exactly,
in this movie. Yeah.
But I came to find out that the Norse Fire political party, they actually have a nose, which is the chief inspector Eric, he's the one who has the hunch about the train tunnels. They have the hand, the fingers. They have the mouth, which is the guy who's always on the TV, like, I say England wins, and because I say, that.
Yeah.
He's
Prothero, is that his name?
Yes.
Prothero.
Yep. And
Commander Prothero to you.
They also have the ear and the eye, the people who are in charge of the audio and visual surveillance. So I thought it was kind of cool, like, when you're building a story, to have a metaphor or something out there that you're building your whole world around, where it's like this government is one hulking mass that we're fighting against, and it's so black and white, evil versus good, and each one has their own part and their own position to play. I thought that was kind of cool, like for a basis, for a structure.
Yeah. What do you think, Cody?
So I picked up on some of that on this watch, and it's interesting because this movie definitely has something to say in regards to religion, politics, and that you kind of have like a body of Christ thing, but you have a government that's operating like that. And then love that the corrupt ministers like mea culpa, which is like a confession term, and I'm like, oh, they're really leaning into the religious imagery as he is about to commit some cardinal sins.
Oh man, there is always the trope nowadays of the Catholic Christian representation in any movie is going to be the worst possible version of a human.
Potentially. And in this one it is. But when you have a government that has clearly outlawed some religion.
Yeah.
Because the Quran is illegal and will cause you to be put to death.
Yeah.
That, like, you got to paint someone within religious circles that is in the approved religion, that you got to paint them bad.
And it fits biblically as well, because this is not just any normal bishop. This dude's like got a lot of power, and power corrupts.
Yes. I will say the casting for this is phenomenal.
Are you serious? Yeah. The casting's good. Everybody's good in this movie.
Like, Stephen Fry always brings out like great performances, even though like his interviews are kind of wonky. But he was great in it. You talked about John Hurt as the dictator or leader, and like, oh, he's phenomenal. The guy that they get for Prothero, he just made me want to punch him in the nose during his...
Why is the British acting pool seem so much deeper than the American pool? Like,
I think
why are all British actors like amazing character actors?
That part of it is like the schools that they get to go to for acting and the theater troupes. But also like to make it into the hierarchy of British actors that can cross over to this side of the pond. Like, it just seems like a lot because there's not that many British people compared to like the American population. And it's like, oh, you got all these phenomenal people and they're just appearing in all these movies. Although I completely forgot how British this movie was. And then I'm like, Natalie Portman, why are you in this?
Yeah, well, it's super interesting because Alan Moore's version is very British. Like, he's coming from a, British frame of mind. And even though the setting here is Britain, it's very American.
Yes. And I loved, and I don't know why I loved it, but like, I loved that they were like, you don't want to end up like the colonies.
Yeah.
As part of their fear-mongering propaganda. And so I definitely, the acting and then the music. When they played music, especially the 1812 overture.
Oh, man, the usage of the 1812 overture by Tchaikovsky is just fantastic. Maybe the best usage of that music in any sort of cinema, followed closely by Caddyshack.
Yes. And then the last thing I'll say is when we first meet V and he goes into the soliloquy of words that begin with V.
Yeah.
I literally turned on the closed captioning so I could pick up every word that he was saying. And I'm like, oh, this is brilliant writing.
I have in my notes of what holds up the dialogue. The written dialogue is so good. Voila. In view, a humble vaudevillian veteran, cast vicariously as both victim and villain by the vicissitudes of fate. This visage, no mere veneer of vanity, is a vestige of the vox populi, now vacant, vanished. However, this valorous visitation of a bygone vexation stands vivified, and has vowed to vanquish these venal and virulent vermin, vanguarding vice, and vouchsafing the violently vicious and voracious violation of volition. The only verdict is vengeance. A vendetta, held as a votive, not in vain, for the value and the veracity of such shall one day vindicate the vigilant and the virtuous. Verily, this vichyssoise of verbiage veers most verbose. So let me simply add that it's my very good honor to meet you, and you may call me V.
Are you like a crazy person?
Yeah. Yes. That is Shakespearean.
It is.
That is one of maybe the greatest lines ever put to celluloid.
It's great.
Like, I love that right before that, he's also like the paradox of asking a masked man who he is.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, that it would make me feel like an idiot, but I would be Natalie Portman asking away.
Yeah. And so, and I hope, my hope is Scotty talks a little bit about this, because the character in the comic is not nearly as likable. He's not nearly as heroic as he's made to be here. But if you're going to go this route and make him heroic, Hugo Weaving, we mentioned the cast. Hugo Weaving's voice and charm, just for never seeing his face, just come through this so amazingly. And from the moment you meet him, you're in love with him. Yeah, you don't like him. You are literally in love with this character. Yeah. And you want to know everything about him, and doesn't matter what he does, you're already on board with identifying with his pain and understanding. He's literally, if only we could evoke this type of empathy for real people.
Yes.
Because from the moment you meet him, because of his charm, we're like, I don't care what he does. I don't care how many people he's murdered, I'm on board.
He comes across as fully motivated, and he also comes across as fully, like, clear-minded. He knows exactly what his mission is, and you trust him, right? Like, it's a lot of flowery language, it's a lot of fancy speak, but in the end, what you're left with is, she asks the question, who are you? And he's like, he tosses it back at her, like, how ironic to ask somebody in a mask who they are. And you're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And then he goes on this long, here's who I am and here's what I'm about and all that kind of stuff. And in the end, like you said, you're like, he knows exactly what he's about. Like, he knows his purpose in life. He knows what he's after.
Well, that whole monologue, That literally explains his character and the movie you're about to watch.
Yep.
We could spend an hour breaking down just that monologue and how it pertains to what you're about to watch.
I'm just impressed he knew that many words that began with the letter V.
He's clearly an educated man.
He's got a few dictionaries in that tunnel that he lives in.
Well, Cody, what else? What else is good for you? What holds up?
The whole movie.
Yeah.
I really love this movie. Like, if you don't put it in the category of being a DC movie or property, it is upper echelon of non-big two comic book movies, like not from Marvel or not from DC. It's like up there, and even if you do include Marvel and DC movies, it's up there.
Yeah, this is one of the best comic book movies. I would echo that. By far, one of the best comic book movies of all time. In my what holds up, the first thing, this is the absolute first thing I wrote in my notes as I start watching this movie today. The real effect of politics. The games we play, the masks we wear, the fear we create. And then as soon as I was done writing that is when the chancellor's on the TV and he says, moments such as these are matters of faith. To fail is to invite doubt into everything we believe, everything we have fought for. Doubt will plunge this country back into chaos, and I will not let that happen. You hear things like that, and boy, does that tie into our political spectrum now. Because that's the language. He's saying the stuff we say. This is the biggest election ever. To lose would somehow damage our faith. Our country will be seriously damaged if that happens. Every election becomes a holy crusade.
Yes, you add in a faith component, or at least faith rhetoric, and for individuals that at least go to church, they will claim that faith is like one of the ultimate concerns. And well, if the country elects this person or does this thing, it's going to ruin not only this country, but it's going to ruin my faith and my whole standing. Now I'm doubly down on this. I am all about this. I'm all in.
And what is it you're espousing there? It's fear. Mm-hmm. And so what I appreciated about this movie that came out how many years ago?
2005.
Almost 20 years ago.
Or 2004, 1 and 2.
Is
6.
that it's so...
Oh, I'm off.
It so accurately predicts where we were heading.
Yeah.
As far as the usage. So you see it in that clip of Chancellor Sutler telling his cronies this. And he's like, yeah, we're going to use fear to control the masses. That's exactly our system now. That is exactly what our political leaders do now. It's how they get reelected. Yeah. Well, this is going to HE double hockey sticks in a handbasket. We got to do this. Otherwise, we're going to lose this. And that's how all the politicians play the game. I'm not even trying to say one side is worse than the other. That's how they all do it. And so I just thought that was extremely prescient.
Oh, yeah.
Anything else? Or that was me. I had already started. Yeah.
You're going on this rabbit hole.
I got one more thing, not to jump ahead too far, but one thing.
Go ahead. Yeah.
One thing that holds up, and not to get too spoilery, but M. Night Shyamalan, when we're talking about a twist in a movie.
Yeah. Yeah.
This movie has one of the only twists that I've ever just felt flabbergasted after it happened. We kind of discussed it a little bit before we started the pod, where
she's in prison.
You're just sitting in awe of the heel turn that has just happened. She's been held captive for months, unable to do anything.
Literally,
shaved her head.
Tortured. Not tortured in the sense we think of, like Jack Bauer shoot you in the kneecaps torture, but like the torture of isolation and imprisonment and no contact with anyone and wondering if you're going to get out alive. All of that you're just left and forgotten about. And the heel turn that makes when you realize it was all V doing it for her benefit, I guess. It's like the worst parenting ever.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, we talked off air, but it's creating some mental health quandaries for sure. But it's like the only way that she's going to realize, like, this is... either you're all in or you're going to be dead.
Well, it's such a paradox because we can see what he's doing, and we intrinsically know this. It's the answer to the question, well, if God exists and God loves us, then why do bad things happen? Well, it's because, as it turns out, you don't learn anything when only good things happen. And if only good things happen to you, you grow up to be a not very nice person. Mm-hmm. That's just generally how that works. And so on one end, we can see like, oh, she needed to learn this lesson, but oh, that was over the line, dude. Over the line. I'm glad you brought that up, though, because I have written down here in my notes, Natalie Portman. It's easy to forget just how talented of an actress she was from an extremely young age. Mm-hmm. I mean, she really shaved her hair for that sequence where she's imprisoned.
Yep.
And the emotion of that comes across the screen. And I think, how old is she in this movie when she films this, or when this movie comes out? Because I think she's still pretty young, if I remember right. She might have been in college when she films this.
Looking. Okay, so she would have been about 24.
Man. So she's, in that, the movie she makes it big with when she's a kid. And I'm losing the title.
Star Wars.
No, it's not Star Wars, for goodness sakes. Like, when you're talking about Natalie Portman's filmography, we just should leave Star Wars out of it. Because boy, did Lucas not do her any favors.
Heat.
No, it's not Heat. It's the
Mars Attacks.
It's the one with the bounty hunter, man. I believe, isn't that?
Where the heart
The Professional. It's The Professional.
Garden
Neon.
State.
Came out in 1994. But she's just amazing. She's amazing in this movie, and I just forgot how amazing she was in this movie. Just absolutely blown away.
Yeah.
And I will say that, like, she doesn't lose her British accent too much. Like, there's one scene where I was like, the American's starting to peek through a little bit. But otherwise, I'm like, she's fitting in with these Brits.
Pretty good. 24 years old to have that good of an accent. Not bad. Not bad.
I mean, she was multilingual at that point, too, though. She, like, spoke fluent Hebrew and English and some French and picked up some German while they were filming this. So, I mean, I think she's, like, pretty lingual at that point.
I'm super intimidated by her now. I could never be in the same room with her. I wouldn't know what to say. Like,
you film perfume commercials? That would be our conversation.
It would be like Chris Farley on those old Saturday Night Live skits. Like, hey, you remember that time when you were in V for Vendetta? That was awesome.
Yeah.
I do have written down the dialogue, and I wrote down some quotes. We're off to blame in this. 'Tis too much proved that with devotion's visage and pious action we do sugar o'er the devil himself. And the guy goes, what's that mean? Spare the rod. I was like,
exactly.
That is just cold-blooded, man. I'm like, oh, that might be the best usage of biblical scripture since Pulp Fiction, right? Like,
and he's tossing back in his face what he just quoted a couple of seconds ago.
Yeah.
Amazing dialogue.
Right.
Including at the very beginning, Natalie Portman with her narration, you cannot kiss an idea. And I'm like, oh.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Natalie, you get me.
I have that the journalistic media is a complete puppet of the ruling forces. Seems pretty pertinent to the times we're in.
Propaganda.
It's not as easy because in this movie it's a fascist regime, so the media is completely closed. But we do know the pockets of media and what side of the ruling classes they're affiliated with, and how that affects the news we get. So we're familiar with that. This movie really predicted the earbud craze, huh?
Oh yeah.
Didn't notice that before, but everybody's wearing earbuds, and I'm like, man, this looks like it was filmed today.
And even the phones don't look outdated in it, and those dynamics, I'm like, you could replay this movie in theaters today, and I think Gen Z younger people will be like, oh yeah, this feels like it was made not that long ago.
Well, this is movie definitely for the younger generations. Like, this is a movie that so encapsulates the discontent that the younger generations have. I have written me here in my notes these things that I just noticed about what the movie was saying and how it pertains to our world. She says, I haven't had real butter since I was a little girl. And that this movie has so many little similarities that a lot of people don't even notice about our times. But like, we've talked about this many times, Cody, how we've messed up food. Like, we've seemingly in our society messed up food. She says, every time I've seen this world change, it's always been for the worse. And I think, yeah, millennials and Gen Z can probably pretty hardcore identify with that.
Yeah.
Is it meaningless to apologize? Never. Like, what a wonderful sentiment.
I love that line.
Yeah.
What a wonderful sentiment. And then, of course, one of my favorites, a revolution without dancing is not a revolution worth having. Like, even in the serious business of a revolution, this guy knows, man, you got to make room for the leisure and the arts. So, yeah, that's what I have on what holds up.
That's great.
What doesn't hold up, Brian? Is there anything you have that doesn't hold up?
I do have a couple of things. Let me add one more thing that holds up, and that's Toady in a hole, because I love eating English breakfast, Toady in a hole, an egg inside of a grilled piece of toast.
That particular breakfast has so many different names. Sunshine sandwiches. There's something else. Egg in the basket. Is that what they call it in the movie?
I think it's eggy in a basket.
Eggy in a basket.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what Stephen Fry calls it.
That's what I've heard it called a lot. My grandmother was British. That's what she called it.
Was your grandmother V?
No.
Because that's what Stephen Fry said. Well, I've been lying to you this whole time. I'm actually V.
For bad things, I think the one thing that it always feels like a plot hole to me. I don't think that it actually is, but it's really hard for me to get my mind around, is at the very end of the movie, we are introduced to this train tunnel that V has spent upwards of 10 years restoring to send a train full of dynamite and explosives to Parliament to blow up, right? And that's fine. He lives underground. He's constructed this tunnel, but at some point that track has to terminate to another track that leads directly underneath Parliament. And there's a moment in the movie where they're like, we think that the biggest threat is going to come from airborne. We don't think it's going to be the train lines. And, you know, the lead inspector's like, I think it could be the train lines. And they basically treat him like an idiot. But all I can think is, you know, the day that this is going to happen, you have a year to prepare for it. No one ran those train lines backwards. Like, no one just walked along the train lines and just said, are there any tunnels that we don't know about that might contain trains full of explosives?
Let me tell you something about bureaucracy there, Brian. Not known for its dedication to details.
Shocking. It's like when they misplace like $3 billion and they're like, oh, clerical error. It happens.
Listen, I'm just kind of dubious because I'm like, yeah, displaced, quote unquote. Sure.
So, yes, that does feel like a plot hole, but then at the same time, we have witnessed it.
Yeah.
So,
what's not so good, Cody?
What doesn't hold up is Natalie Portman actually being able to survive outside of the V-den. Just because now, like, all the cameras have facial recognition and cameras are everywhere and people have cameras on their phone and like someone just has to catch her in the background of a film and then it's triggering to the investigators and then boom, Natalie Portman, you're gone.
Yeah, that seems like one of those plot lines in the movie that gets sacrificed because of the time, because we don't actually see. It's just like, oh, she's back out in the real world for a while, and then she comes back and talks with V again what is apparently months later, although her head's still shaved.
There was some fuzz.
Yeah, we could have used a nice little 5 to 8 minute vignette of how she's living.
We would have been approaching the Snyder cut of this.
Here's what I have for what doesn't hold up real well. Like I said earlier, you can really see the influence of Batman movies on this movie of all things. And right off the bat in that first action sequence with V, the music sounds like Danny Elfman. The action's choreographed like Batman action sequences, although you can also see like the Matrix, because the Wachowskis are involved in this. And it's kind of all wrong to me as I'm watching it, even though I'm satisfied by it. I also feel like it's kind of all wrong. And let me explain. I understand the Wachowskis, and I can see the influence of what their lives up to this point, like their sensibilities and why they're writing it this way. Like I can see that and say, yeah, that makes sense to me. If this movie comes out today in its exact same form, I wouldn't like it, because to me, it's overly political, and it's overly like liberalism is good and conservativeness is bad, which I don't think is a fair deal. And I think Alan Moore, who's an anarchist, would kind of agree. I think that was his problem with the movie, which I'm hoping Scotty will get into when we talk to him. But that's my one beef with it.
Sure.
If the question is what doesn't hold up, is I think if this movie comes out now in a more polarized, cynical time, half the people would love it, and half the people would say this is dog manure, because it's not an honest take on our political system, right? And for what it's worth, even though it's England is the setting, this is a highly Americanized take,
definitely,
on the story. And so, and this is, again, I read a quote by Alan Moore. He's like, one of his big problems with this movie was that he was coming at it. V's an anarchist character. He's not a hero, and the bad people aren't conservative. They're structure in general. So humans with power. And in this way, I think he's right. The idea of the governments, which government would be best or which ones lead to fascism most, is, well, the answer is all of them. Because at the end of the day, I believe the best form of government, because this is where I would differ from Alan Moore. Alan Moore would say, well, no government's good. It's always going to devolve into this. I would disagree. There is one government that would be best. That's monarchy. Monarchy with a really benevolent king who's literally the embodiment of love. He loves you so much that he will do what's best for you always, right? No human can fill that void.
Yeah.
So in some ways, I agree with Alan Moore, and in some ways, I'm like, yeah, but there is a way.
So I think for me, the way the movie ends with like, you don't know what's going to be in place after the events of November 5th. But it leaves it open that it kind of writes off some of Alan Moore's complaint. But the way that it's portrayed, like for 99.9% of the movie, that like it's just one specific style of government. But the way it ends, it's like, oh, there's not a government in place.
But there will be.
Potentially.
That's Alan Moore's point.
Yeah.
Is that new government will get installed, and over time, it will denigrate into greed and corruption. Because the problem's not the government, it's the humans.
Evie will take out this new government.
All right, it's time for a new segment on the Be Kind Rewind. We're going to Muppetize the movie. And what I mean by Muppetize is, some of you are familiar with this craze on social media. We're going to keep one human actor, and everyone else in the film will be Muppets. So I think I said pick 3 specific Muppets and their parts, along with one human character that remains. Brian, who's your human actor?
I was so excited for this segment. My mind immediately had to do the reverse, which is if there was only one Muppet and everybody else remained the same.
That's where my mind went to as well.
And my mind was just evil Kermit as the High Chancellor.
Oh my gosh.
Just seeing a hooded Kermit up on a big screen in front of everybody being like, this government will not survive if it has to be subject to your feelings. Yeah. I couldn't get it out of my mind, so I had to share that first, but I did do the...
So you are going Kermit as the Chancellor.
I am. I'm keeping him. I think that's a perfect casting. I think the correct answer is you have to keep Natalie Portman. I think she has to be V. I can't imagine any of the Muppet female leads, Miss Piggy or the bass player from the band. I can't even think of her name.
I agree. I think that's what works.
I think Natalie Portman is the obvious answer for me. I did have Fozzie Bear as Gordon, the Stephen Fry character.
Yeah, I toyed around with that. He fits.
I had Gonzo as V because I just like the idea of a Guy Fawkes mask with that huge nose.
I just like the idea. We're gonna have a lot of similarities.
So imagine Gonzo down in his cave underground, looking at a picture of Camilla the chicken up on the poster, and that's the reason he's doing all this is for his long lost chicken that has been killed instead of Valerie in the movie.
That's amazing, yeah.
I had a couple more. I had Sam the Eagle as Creedy, so the evil inspector who's just the embodiment of evil.
Right.
I had Sam the Eagle because he's very just like, you guys are all weirdos.
Yeah.
Like, good character.
Totally.
And then I had Animal as the guy who's just always spewing the propaganda. So every time a TV would turn on, he'd just be like, "Rah, rah, 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 rah."
Government good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Perfect.
So that was my Muppet casting.
I really want to see this movie. Cody,
Okay.
who Muppetized this movie?
So I'm keeping Mr. Hugo.
Hugo Weaving is V.
Yes.
That's the other obvious way to go, I think.
Yeah.
But the three that I'm recasting aren't going to involve Natalie Portman. So
just ignoring
Okay.
that.
yeah. That's the easiest route to do that. Prothero or Commander Prothero, I want to be Gonzo. Delivering the news and then talking about how the person captured his nose at the wrong angle and made it look super huge.
That's a good one.
Then the scientist lady Delia is
you went way side character. Is that Miss Piggy?
it's Miss Piggy.
That works.
Well, I went with the characters that V interacts with and kills, and so the priest is Kermit.
How on a scale of 1 to oh my goodness, how affecting would it be for kids to watch a human actor kill Muppets? That would be heavy.
It would be. And so like I had that casting, and then I also had another casting where it was more mainline characters, but I preferred to go with who does Hugo kill and we will cast them.
Bishop Kermit, no.
I went the same route as Brian. I'm keeping Natalie Portman. I'm going to have Kermit as the detective.
Okay.
The lead detective.
Stephen Ray
that
character.
works.
He's the guy trying to figure it all out. I have Gonzo as V because I just want to hear him say, "A humble vaudevillian veteran." Just him delivering that monologue would be so excellent.
That'd be awesome.
And then I'm most proud of this one because as the Chancellor, I'm going with Beaker. Just having him up on the screen going, me.
Good one.
That would just be so absurd that I'm here for it. And so, yeah, I want all those versions of the movie because that would be great. Muppetize the movie. All right, Cody, we got to go to the geek phone because it's time for deeper themes with Scotty.
Let's go to the geek phone.
Geek phone. All right, we are on the geek phone with Geek of the Round Table, Scotty, who is our resident comic book expert. If anybody could tell us about the original source material, Alan Moore's original V for Vendetta story, I know it's Scotty. Yeah. So Scotty, where are we at here? Tell us. Well, first of all, how are you doing?
I'm doing good.
Great. It's great to have you on. Tell us a little bit about V for Vendetta.
Well, the first thing we got to realize is that Alan Moore is a very eccentric guy. He has created some of the greatest works that we think about in comics, like Sure Gentleman, V for Vendetta, Watchmen. A lot of his themes come from his turbulent growing up in the UK. So he grew up in a time it was very much the Queen was coming into power. And we're seeing a bunch of new heads of state were being brought in and kind of very turbulent, not knowing what was coming. And he lived through a time of nuclear war. That was always a threat. So he used those kind of influences to really influence this story. So in the comic, it picks up post a nuclear fallout. So future apocalyptic is really where it sets at.
Yeah, that's interesting stuff there. And I forgot about that.
You know,
It definitely
so
changes the story from
it,
what
it
we're
does
presented.
it does a lot. We talk about these things that really influenced him. He drew on these things a lot. You know, he first pitches a story that really wasn't what they were looking for, called The Doll. It was about a transgender terrorist in white fake up. That was kind of the first pitch that kind of went on the back burner after it was kind of rejected. It wasn't really what they wanted. So he dove back in and really went back to his influences on top of kind of this changing landscape of how politically things were changing in his country. You know, so he looked at things like Orwell and Huxley and even like the Judge Dredd comics, some Harlan Ellison, even like Vincent Price's Dr. Phoebes, you know, and Theodem of Blood, and David Bowie in The Shadow, and then even Batman to an extreme. He looked at those things in Fahrenheit 451. And then there was a comic called Night Raven that was really the precursor for this and really set up where he would go.
We talked a little bit about before in our discussion already. We've talked about the differences between the movie. Specifically, they kind of go from the anarchism of Alan in the original material to a kind of liberalistic storytelling point where liberalism's the good guy instead of there are no good guys and I'm just for anarchy and V is for anarchy. You know, instead in the movie they make him more of a clear-cut hero, which means you have to have more of a clear-cut bad guy. And guys, because I actually read some things while studying for this that Alan Moore, and of course he's always outspoken as far as his material that's been adapted. But he was actually pretty outspoken when this movie came out of V's not so much of a good guy and the bad guys aren't supposed to be so mustache twirling bad.
Well, his original thing was that it was supposed to be anarchism versus fascism.
Yes.
So you know when you start to develop this movie, the Wachowskis really do start to draw on their kind of experiences. You know, when this movie came out, we're living in a bush kind of landscape. So they really turned this piece more into a piece about what we were dealing with in the States. And sadly kind of becomes that. But I think I know he's not a big fan of that change out, but I think it does bring some kind of interesting things. And I, you know, watching it back through again, it still holds up, you know, no matter where you look at it. So I see his point of not being back to the anarchism versus fascism thing, but I do think it works for what we got. And it really does, sadly, you know, kind of project where we're at culturally and politically in the world.
Yeah, so especially we've had a lot of discussion already about how politically there's a lot of things that they get right about where we're at now. The usage of fear to drive what you want out of the people, to strengthen your hold as a ruling class. In this case, the ruling class would be the politicians who run the show in our culture and context. But I never thought I'd say this, but I actually think I have something where in the line of thought of what Alan Moore is going for, I actually agree with the anarchist where he says, no, you don't understand. There is no good guys and bad guys. The bad guy is power, that it gets centralized, and humans, when they get power, are going to get corrupt and greedy, and it leads to fascism. And I'm like, yeah, I think I agree with that.
And I think that comes out of his kind of living in that world of, you know, at one point during that time frame when he wrote this, you were still had that fall of Margaret Thatcher and the decommissioning of nuclear weapons. So there wasn't, you know, you had somebody sitting there with all the power, and you had people who were like, probably this shouldn't be the person that has their finger on the button. So this story for him really became his what if that election went the wrong direction, and what if they want to decommission?
Yeah. What an interesting difference from our context as Americans too, to think, oh yeah, England got rid of all their nuclear weaponry.
Yes.
And how absolutely insane that sounds to us as Americans in the middle of the Cold War.
Oh yeah.
It's wild. Anything else you'd like to share?
Well, I have one fun fact, and I know we kind of talked about this, but a lot of people don't realize the show Pennyworth would go on to be a prequel to Gotham, but it also is a prequel for V for Vendetta.
Wow. What? Okay, explain.
So when the show writers were brought in, their whole thought process was that you could tie these worlds together. So Pennyworth is what is kind of the backstory of Alfred Pennyworth, favorite butler in comics.
Batman's butler, yeah.
Batman's butler, and I highly recommend it. It's really good. It probably for me is better than the actual original show Gotham, but that's nor here nor there. But when they came in, they wrote thinking that at some point where they would lead this show would be where V for Vendetta would begin, because it was taking place in the UK, even so much so that you see the Guy Fawkes mask in the final season.
Wild. Now I need a Batman V for Vendetta crossover.
Exactly.
Crossover I always knew we needed.
Make it happen. All right, Scotty, thank you for dropping your ever-present comic book knowledge.
Anytime, guys. Thank you
Yep.
for having me on.
We'll see you next time.
See you next time.
All right, we're just off the geek phone with Scotty. Scotty, man, Scotty's like, I would not go anywhere else for my comic book. If I needed to know something about comic books, I'm going to Scotty.
Literally, he was telling his significant other during the Venom 3 Last Dance movie that who each of the symbiotes were that were not explained whatsoever. And I'm like, well, it would have been helpful they had said their names, and I could have been like, oh, okay, this makes sense, but we did not get that.
I promise you we're not in, New York City.
Or Gotham.
Or Gotham, although it sounds like it. My goodness, something going on in our little town. All right, it's time for the last few things we get to in everything here. Winner of the movie, Brian, as the emergency vehicles roll by. Who's your winner of the movie?
I think we got to go Natalie Portman. We already knew that she was a talented actress, but this solidified in the same year, Star Wars Episode 3, an instant classic, and also V for Vendetta. But no, seriously, I think she showed in this movie, like, this is just a taste of the depth of acting that we can come to expect in the years to come. But this is the first time I think a lot of people were introduced with just how good of an actress she truly is.
They didn't watch her breakout role in Garden State.
It's fair.
You can't argue with that pig. Can't argue with that pig. Cody?
So short term, I would say it's Natalie Portman because you get instant solidification of her acting prowess and it solidifies her career. Long term, though, I'm going Hugo Weaving. The dude just is in good works, like the Lord of the Rings series, V for Vendetta, and of course The Matrix. And so, like, he's in these, like, very massive pop culture fandom roles, and he's always memorable in them.
Yeah. Not just massive pop culture, but geek culture.
Oh, yeah.
In 1999, he's in The Matrix. In 2001, he's in The Fellowship of the Ring. And in 2005, he's in V for Vendetta. But oh, wait, he's not done, because in 2011, he's Red Skull in the Captain America movie. I mean, yeah, bro. This dude is geek legend.
And so I think this role solidifies, like, oh, you want a memorable acting performance and you want something that everyone knows? Hugo's the man.
Yeah. I don't know that this movie springboards him. By the way, he's my winner of the movie too. And I thought long about this. And I don't disagree with Natalie Portman, because I feel like this is one of the movies that really springboards her into what, is going to be her career. And I toyed around with the Wachowskis too, but I couldn't get past that The Matrix had already happened. That by this point, they're working on a blank check at this point.
I was going to say they might have peaked
yeah,
already. So,
but after The Matrix, this is the best thing they've done in my in my opinion. And I have issues with what they changed, but it's still a good story. It's still really good. And I have issues with their sensibilities, what their sensibilities led them to change about the story too. But I still look at this and think, boy, they got a lot right though. But I ended up with as Hugo Weaving just on the geek cred alone. The charm, again, I got to say it because he's wearing a mask the entire movie, but he just oozes charm and really just character. Just to be able to do that with just your voice is just fascinating to me. Brian, who's the loser of the movie?
You guys are both going to have to fight me on this one, but I actually have Hugo Weaving as the loser of this movie. And
is it because of the mask?
It's distinctly because of the mask, because he gives an all-time performance. He gives the best lines and delivery, and he's able to act so well from behind a mask and make himself believable, make himself endearing, make himself charming. But at the end of the movie, unless you're nerdy enough to look up the credits and figure out who he was, if you're just someone who went and saw the movie, you walk away and go, wow, Natalie Portman was amazing and I love V for Vendetta and that's great. But I mean, I'm being honest when I said I rewatched it this week. I didn't know who V was until I looked it up this week.
Yeah, because I mean, the soliloquy alone, the monologue that he delivers,
I think
that should be legendary.
Yeah, I think for the people who know that it's Hugo, even if there was a moment in the movie where the mask comes off a little bit and you could see his face, then maybe people would know. But the fact is, he did an all-time, all-star performance, and most people aren't going to know that it was him. And I think that kind of sucks.
Yeah. Who's your loser of the movie?
So my loser of the movie is, if my phone won't stop messing up, the guy that actually plays Guy Fawkes, because you only get him for like 2 seconds.
You get him for like the 30-second history lesson.
And he gets captured instantly.
Clive Ashbourne, who I think was actually in one of the Pirates of the Caribbean movies.
Of course he was.
He's the loser because like the whole movie is basically like his character's face plastered everywhere, but like no one knows you.
Talk about taking like a legendary figure in historical circles in England as Guy Fawkes and making him into like kind of a loser. Yeah, dude got caught before he did anything. He's lame.
And literally is only on screen for like 15, 30 seconds.
And he could be anybody. Like his facial hair looks fake and he's kind of in a dark cave, kind of sneaking.
Yep.
Oh, man. Loser of the movie for me, anarchists. Poor anarchists. They're like, wait, this is not how this story's supposed to go.
This was our story.
Wait, liberalism? No, it's all of them. They're all terrible. No rules.
It was nearly the little girl that gets killed.
I think that's
she was a backup for me.
That's a good nod.
It's a rough character moment.
Yeah, because like
that was someone's big break, though.
Yeah, you kind of fall in love with this junior anarchist that is like, yeah, I love this, and then I get caught spray painting, and now I'm no longer amongst the living.
Yeah, take notes, junior fighters of the man. This is serious business.
Also, if you're wearing those Coke bottle glasses, maybe you need to get contacts and put them behind the mask instead of on top of the mask.
Yes.
All right, Brian, how many Guy Fawkes masks out of 10?
I'm giving this movie a 7.5 Guy Fawkes masks out of 10.
Okay, it's a pretty good score.
Solid 9.
Yeah, I'm gonna give it I wanted to give it a 9, but then I'm gonna knock it down to 8.5, simply on the fact that I don't think it quite holds up. I think I probably would have given this a 9 when I first saw it, but now I'm gonna go down to 8.5, simply because of the changes they made to make him more heroic, which I understand, to make it a more palatable story for American audiences,
and also some more mask.
Yeah, right. But you lose, I do think you lose the tiniest bit of what the story was trying to say. You make it and really they make it a completely different story, which is still a really good story. But I'm going to knock it down a half point. 8.5.
I'm good with it.
It's very good. Very much worth the rewatch. All right. What do you guys think of V for Vendetta? Is it one of your favorites? Who do you think the winner of the movie is? Did you know all the backstory about the original source material, the graphic novels? Let us know in the social media post for this. As always, make sure and subscribe and review us. Give us reviews, but only if they're going to be good reviews. Don't review bomb us. That wouldn't be cool. Give us 5s, 10s, whatever is the full score. And share our pod with other people. That helps as well. We're getting good listenership the last couple weeks, so things are happening.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And we will be at Air Capital Comic Con in Wichita the weekend of, is that the 15th, 16th?
15th and 16th.
Yeah. So if you're in Wichita area, come check us out at Air Capital Comic Con. We'll see you next time.